The story began on a beautiful day. The girl turned to meet the light breeze and listened to the birds singing. The other maids finally breathed a sigh of relief, having finally finished hanging out the laundry. They complained to each other that the work had made their muscles grow. The girl looked around herself, but didn't notice anything like that behind her. Nevertheless, it was time to turn back, but the girls wanted to rest a little longer. A moment later, two maids stood up abruptly, for someone had said that Princess Grace had arrived. The maids turned quickly to look at the lady. The maids were sincerely jealous of the young princess, because she could wear any dress. Moreover, she was the daughter of the emperor. The maids said that they would also like to live such a life, but the girl said that it was not so easy and, pointing to the princess's dress, said that it weighed at least 20 kilograms. The maids were amazed. She also said that under the dress, there was a very tight corset that barely allowed the hostess to breathe. Therefore, the girl did not envy the princess. Moreover, through all this pain, the princess had to smile brightly. At this, Siana asked the maids if they still wanted such a life, and they immediately denied it. But one still decided to ask how her colleague knew what it was like to be a princess. The girl was a little taken aback by this, but she told herself that she knew about it because she had been a princess just like that until recently. Her parents were the king and queen of a small kingdom. That's where she was born. Her full name was Siana Asilond von Sillet. Since she was a little girl, she thought she would grow up in love and harmony like any other princess. However, when the girl was 10 years old, her mother suddenly left this world. The girl had a hard time surviving this tragic moment, but her father did not remain in mourning for long and rather quickly brought a new woman into the house. But despite this, the girl tried her best to fulfill her duty to her family. Her stepmother promised to make the princess a worthy lady in memory of her mother. However, under the guise of upbringing, Siana was constantly subjected to insults and beatings. The stepmother constantly scolded her stepdaughter for not being able to cope. Because the girl couldn't perform the greeting correctly, her stepmother said she would beat her with a whip. Siana was terrified, because this wasn't the first time today. The princess could barely stand. The dress was extremely heavy, and the corset was squeezing everything. The thoughts that she might die did not leave her. And yet the girl tried to do everything according to her stepmother's orders, because she was sure that such an upbringing was normal for princesses. She understood that she should have tried, but none of this mattered to her stepmother, because she beat her stepdaughter again and again. The woman kept scolding the unfortunate girl and asking how she could look at His Majesty if the girl still couldn't get through. The stepmother was about to attack the princess, but the king suddenly entered the room. The woman stopped abruptly and looked at her husband in horror. Noticing her father, the girl began to reach out to him, mentally begging him to save her. But the king turned around and instead praised his wife for her actions. After receiving her punishment, the girl ran as fast as she could down the corridor to hide in her rooms. She kept thinking about how she had deserved such treatment because she had tried to do everything that was required of her. She realized that she hated her family and thought that it would be better for her to disappear. She thought so, but she had no idea that such a thing could happen. When she turned 18, invaders came to her kingdom and took it by storm, and it burned down in half a day. At the head of the procession stood Prince Rashid Labadan de Adran, Crown Prince of the Labadan Empire. The prince addressed the captives and said that since they had not responded to his letter, he had come personally and asked if they were ready to surrender. Siana was already ready to accept this. The girl was sure that if they accepted defeat, they would be able to stay alive. But her father categorically refused, saying that it was better to die. The prince accepted the former king's words without objection and instantly tore his head off his shoulders. The princess quickly hid her face, but the drops of blood did not hide from her. After the king was executed, the prince told everyone to know about it, and then slowly began to approach the princess to execute her as well. The girl felt it, and although she understood that her life had not been so happy, She did not want to say goodbye to him just yet. Putting her head to the floor, she begged him not to kill her. The girl began to assure him that she was ready for anything. The prince thought for a moment and asked if she was ready to become his concubine. The princess replied that she was not very suitable for this because she was always told that she looked like a grey mouse. Instead, she said that she was skilled in many things and was in good health, so she asked to be made a maid. In a moment, Sienna realised that she had said too much and couldn't believe she had managed to say such a thing, so she didn't know what to do now. After a short silence, the prince said that he would like to see her face. The girl obediently looked up and, looking at Rashid, remarked to herself that he was handsome. After looking closely at the princess, the prince finally said that she was right about her appearance, because she looked like unleavened bread. After his words, the girl hoped that the prince really did not want to see her as his concubine. After that, Lebedin agreed to her proposal and took her as a maid in his palace. After that, the prince ordered Sol to untie the girl's hands. Sienna bowed and thanked the prince. The girl smiled and said that she would never forget this kindness from the prince. Rashid and Sol looked at her, and the prince said quietly that he must have left a rather lovely girl alive. So she became a servant. In the kingdom she was a princess, and in the empire she became a maid. She could have fallen into despair, thinking that her situation was too difficult. However, the girl herself baked the bread, washed the linen, and kept the garden tidy. It was a completely different world from the princess's life, where everything just didn't let her breathe. Now she didn't have to do anything against her will. Sienna realised that she was truly happy being a simple maid and would like to live like that until she was old. The former princess was scrubbing the floor with a wide smile, but suddenly a shadow fell over her. The girl looked up and saw that a red-haired maid and her colleagues were standing above her. Jeanne was unhappy that the new girl was doing something she wasn't even asked to do, and she thought it was just to get noticed by the older maids, so she angrily said that she would never be accepted. Sienna looked at the girl incomprehensibly and couldn't figure out what was wrong with her, so she assumed she had some kind of personal grudge. However, after a moment, the former princess thought that it was some kind of battle for territory. But before she could say anything else, another maid began to quickly approach from behind. The sturdy maid attacked Jeanne for harassing Sienna again for no reason, so she started scolding her for it and saying that she was interfering with the others' work. Juju was also a junior maid, but she said that if this continued, she would complain to the seniors. This made the culprit shut up. After that, the maid said that she had no intention of offending the new girl, so if she wanted to, she could do whatever she wanted. After that, as if by accident, the girls ran away, knocking over a bucket of water. Juju shouted something at the bullies, but immediately turned to Sienna and said that she should be able to stand up for herself, because they wouldn't stop picking on her. But the girl didn't think that they had said anything wrong. The former princess did not accept Jeanne's insulting words, because she had spent her entire life being insulted by her stepmother, so the maid's words were just child's play. A new acquaintance said that Jeanne was the daughter of a wealthy merchant famous in his empire, so she wouldn't be surprised if she got the position of head maid without any effort. Nevertheless, Juju didn't think that a person's origin mattered, but still, looking at her colleague, she knew that she was a foreigner, so she thought she had someone to turn to. She thought about her colleague's words and immediately thought of the crown prince, but she didn't think he would try to help her in any way, because it was he who had taken everything from her and made her a maid in his palace. Putting aside her sadness, the former princess smiled and immediately replied that she had no patron. At this moment, in His Majesty's office, the prince asked Sol how the new maid was doing. The assistant did not immediately answer, but first looked carefully at Rashid. The boy was annoyed by the prince's appearance, and he knew that even his enemies greatly admired the prince's appearance, and because of this, they missed blows that led to their deaths. Sol knew the prince well, having grown up together, so he assumed that he was not under the influence of the prince's spell. Finally, he replied that Sienna had done a good job. However, the assistant was somewhat alarmed that the prince was interested in this at all, so he asked about it, to which the prince didn't even know if he could answer for sure, and assumed it was a feeling of guilt. The aide knew the prince well, and he had never thought about such a thing before. So he said that he knew His Majesty's weaknesses, that he could not pass by a pretty girl. Rashid looked at him. A moment later, small animals ran into the office. They immediately surrounded the prince, and the assistant thought that this very crown prince, who was terrifying everyone around him, was a great lover of cute animals. Finally, the prince said that he hoped the new girl could learn the trade of a maid. Sol thought about it, assuming that it was a call to help her, but he was not sure of her abilities. Therefore, the assistant said that it was too early to make the former princess a maid. But the prince replied that in that case, it would be a good idea to test her abilities, and the assistant was somewhat surprised. Finally, the girls were served dinner, but Juju was disappointed that there was no meat in it again. But Sienna, on the contrary, was very happy that she no longer had to monitor the delicacy of the dishes. However, the girl had no time to take a piece in her mouth when Jana approached from behind, wanting to insult her again, and said that the maid must have come from a poor area since she liked these vegetables. Without reacting to the insult, the girl wondered if her rival had finished there, or if she still wanted to say something. However, the friend was amazed that the newcomer did not react at all to her insult, because the others immediately burst into tears upon hearing something like that. But Sienna looked as if she had fallen in love with Jeanne. The maid didn't have time to say anything else when Juju abruptly stood up and threatened to remind the merchant's daughter not to approach the new one again, otherwise there would be consequences. But this time, the girl wasn't scared, and said that her colleague probably thought she was the boss here because of her size, but she was wrong, because the boss here was the merchant's daughter. Sienna's new friend wasn't going to give up so easily either, so she got into a fight with the cheeky maid. The former princess thought the two were like a bear and a hyena fighting. Riff, who was also the instructor for the new girls, arrived at the noise. Upon her arrival, the girls immediately calmed down. The senior maid didn't care if the new ones did any harm to themselves, as long as they didn't cause trouble to others. In a moment, she got a letter and said that there would be a tea party in a couple of days. The older maid told her that the new maids would have to greet the guests. One of the girls wondered why the younger maids were supposed to greet the guests. Nevertheless, the tea party was supposed to go perfectly. The other maids were already excited, expecting some distinguished person to come to the tea party. But they were quickly put down and informed that there would be people growing fruit for the imperial table. Riff explained that the fruit served at the imperial table was always fresh and delicious, so in honour of the painstaking work of the women who worked on the fruit, they were invited to a tea party. The next 2 days, the girls were to practice etiquette. After the senior maid left, Jana did not hide her anger that they would have to serve the peasants, and said that this job would suit Siani. The girl thought about the task that awaited them, and understood that the older maids would not waste time on such a thing, so they ordered the younger ones to do it. But nevertheless, it was all strange. The next morning, Reef gathered all the newcomers in the garden, and announced that the first lesson would be to explain all the rules of etiquette. The senior maid knew that although there were new girls in front of her, they all came from aristocratic families. Juju was happy that they would not only be trained, but also given real work. Sienna saw how enthusiastic her friend was about it, but she knew that desire and skill didn't always go hand in hand, because the maid wasn't doing very well. The other maids began to mock their colleague, and Juju tried her best to restrain herself, even though she heard them clearly. Reef ordered Jeanne to now try to do the same. The girl got down to business and started pouring tea. She did it very well, so she began to receive praise from her colleagues. She accepted the praise easily, because for her this matter was not difficult, since she had learned etiquette from a young age, so she did not want to stay in the student ranks for long and wanted to become a chambermaid as soon as possible. Siana silently watched her rival and had no doubt at all what she was thinking. However, when she was still a princess, she knew very well that the best of the maids was always chosen to be Her Majesty's chambermaid. Even for the slightest mistake, the chambermaid received merciless punishment from the Queen. And those maids that the former princess saw had sometimes even better manners than those of the aristocrats themselves. Girls of this profession tried to learn calmness and humility so as not to anger the Queen when serving tea. Looking at her colleagues, the girl couldn't help but notice that compared to those chambermaids, her colleagues were completely inept. And yet she couldn't help but notice that even for that, no one kicked them out. The girl's turn to pour the tea finally came, and Siana thought that she wouldn't want to deliberately stand out among her colleagues. Although she was good at pouring tea, she deliberately did it a little carelessly because she didn't want to be better than everyone else, but wanted to be a little modest. After the classes, which the girls happily received and were happy to study, no one cancelled their duties. So after the training, the maids continued to do their work. After everyone had worked hard, one of the colleagues brought fresh bread so that the tired maids could rest a little and have a snack. The former princess gratefully accepted the gift. She consoled herself with the thought that she was glad to work in the kitchen for this very reason, and thanks to Zhuzh, they were able to finish the work faster. However, Siana noticed that her friend was upset and silent the whole time, and after a moment the girl asked her new friend if today's lessons were difficult for her. The former princess breathed a sigh of relief, as she had been worried that the maid might have noticed that the girl had deliberately spilled the tea badly. She replied that it had been difficult for her too, but she had not been punished. Siana didn't know what to say, because to her surprise, her friend received the most punishment from the senior maid today, even though she had always been praised before. The girl sat silently next to her friend, trying to find words to support her in her first failure. Zhuzh still couldn't calm down, and had to admit that Zham was right, and she had never drunk tea before, so she was sure that everyone was worried that she might ruin the tea party. The girl looked at her friend, and thought that the crown prince had made her a maid, but the only one who cared about her was Zhuzh, so she had to help her at all costs. At this, the girl turned to her friend and offered to teach her. The maid was surprised, and Siana explained that between breaks she could show how to pour tea correctly. At this strong maid stood up and started mumbling something, and finally rushed to her friend and hugged her tightly, thanking her for the offer. Zhuzh simply did not expect such kindness from her colleague, because all she did was wash the floor. Siana could not understand whether it was gratitude or an insult. The next day they immediately started training, and the friend was so focused that sometimes she didn't notice anything else except the former princess teaching her how to pour tea. In fact, the process of pouring tea itself was simple. You just had to prepare boiling water in advance, then pour in the tea leaves, and wait a bit before pouring the tea. After the girl explained everything, she began to look at her friend. Finally, Zhuzh managed to do it, and the girl praised her. The maid was extremely happy to hear these words and told her friend that she taught much better than other teachers. The girl was a little taken aback by the praise, but she thanked him anyway. And during these training sessions, the girls became best friends. Evening came, and before going to rest, the girls decided to have some tea. At this, Zhuzh told a little about herself. She said that she was from a family of miners. The girl said that her family had 13 children, and her father worked tirelessly to feed them. She also wanted to help her father, so she went to work here because it paid well. She also heard that senior maids were well paid, so she wanted to have this position. Siana praised her friend for her efforts, and Zhuzh wondered how her friend got here. The girl understood that she could not tell the truth about herself, that she was a princess, because it would only complicate everything. So she replied that the crown prince had taken pity on her, because the old kingdom was no more. Hearing this, the miner's daughter could not believe that her friend had actually seen the crown prince with her own eyes. The girl was not at all surprised that her friend was so excited when she heard about the crown prince, because she had heard about him more than once from other girls, so she understood that he was famous here. Juju would also like to see him, but she suddenly asked if the rumours were true that despite his beauty, the prince was quite cruel, and Sienna confirmed it. The girl confessed to her friend that the prince had killed her entire family and the miner's daughter had disappeared, so she immediately apologised for asking about it. At this point, the former princess realised that she couldn't say anything more, lest the truth come out. She replied that she didn't feel sorry, because her family constantly bullied and beat her. It was hard for her friend to hear that Sienna didn't care about the death of her family. She burst into tears and rushed to hug her friend, saying that she would rather have her tongue cut out for asking such questions. Paying attention to how her friend reacted, she clearly understood that she couldn't tell the truth. So she replied that it was a long time ago, so it didn't hurt her that much anymore. Juju realised that her friend had said it so that she wouldn't feel guilty for her questions. She hugged her friend again, but not so tightly this time. After that, the attitude towards the former princess from the side of her best friend only became better. One day, Jeanne tried to somehow offend the girl, but did not have time to say anything when her friend came. Also, her friend constantly fed Sienna, not letting her go hungry for a moment. After tasting the candy, the girl told her friend that the candy was really delicious, and Juju was happy because it was much better than stale bread. Now the maid had a completely different opinion of the prince and could not believe that he had really killed her friend's entire family. She considered him a lunatic. Sienna could physically feel her friend's thoughts. The girl felt somewhat guilty that her friend now thought badly of the crown prince because of her, but she was pleased to think that someone was on her side. She was sure that if the prince was really bad, he would hear bad things about himself more than once, so she decided to pretend that she hadn't heard anything. Meanwhile, Rashid felt that he was being remembered. The crown prince looked at the apples lying nearby and took one, saying that these fruits were the best. Sol agreed, but did not understand why the lord had called the Appleton family for this. In a moment, the assistant guessed that this invitation was a real test for Sienna. The prince confirmed it and, for the assistant's guess, gave him permission to play with his animals all day. The aide declined the offer, and the prince merely smiled. He then read a letter that said Baroness Appleton had also wished to come to tea. So the day of the tea party itself arrived, and since the maids had the task of not embarrassing the imperial family at this event, all the younger maids were busy from the very morning. Early in the morning, the garden had to be tidied up, white tables had to be set up according to the number of guests, and so that these tables did not look empty, vases of fresh hydrangeas had to be placed on them. Sienna had just finished filling and placing the vases with flowers when Juju approached her and whispered that, in addition to the servants, the Baroness herself would be at the tea party. After that, the girl noticed that all her colleagues somehow perked up a lot, because now they had the task of serving not only ordinary people, but also a respected person. She also noticed Jana, who was dressed better than usual. She even put on makeup and put on beautiful hairpins. Juju was already starting to get angry that the mean maid had gone a little overboard with all this. Sienna couldn't help but agree, but she couldn't help but notice that her friend had also made an effort to dress up today. To this, the friend replied that she just wanted everything to look better. The girl smiled at her friend and assured her that everything would work out for him, and at that, they shook hands. When the time came and the gates opened, admitting the guests, the younger maids bowed solemnly, welcoming the arrivals. After the greetings, the maids began to escort the guests to their seats. However, for some reason, the procession took a very long time to move, and Siani wondered who was holding them up. Looking ahead, she noticed Shanna, who was looking around restlessly. The girl immediately realised that her colleague only wanted to serve the Baroness, so she was looking for her. But it wasn't just about Jeanne. she looked around again and noticed that all the maids behaved as if they were noble ladies, which caused some discomfort among the guests. But it was easy to impress the peasants. As a rule, the tea ceremony began when all the guests arrived at the venue, and the most important guest, whom everyone was expecting, arrived last. As soon as the elegant lady got out of the carriage, all the maids immediately turned their attention to her, and Jeanne almost jumped out of the dressing room when she noticed the woman, and immediately realised that it was the Baroness. The maid immediately rushed to the Baroness and bowed, after which she abruptly turned to her friends, making it clear that this lady was behind her, and that no one dared to approach. As soon as Baroness Appleton passed by Sienna, the girl immediately smelled the scent of perfume, which was very popular among noble ladies. However, the girl believed that the Baroness belonged to the lower part of the aristocracy. But if a woman could afford such expensive perfume, then she was probably richer than she seemed. After such a spectacular meeting with the Baroness, the maids were just talking about it, but suddenly they noticed that an even older woman had gotten out of the carriage, but no one wanted to serve her. The girl looked at the woman and reminded herself again that the tea party would not begin until the last guest arrived, so she ran over to greet the older lady and show her to her table. Each table had 3 to 4 guests and was served by one maid. When all the guests were seated, the tea party finally began. The ladies were talking among themselves and said with delight that they had not expected to be at such a tea party, because it was not just a simple procession, it was in the imperial palace. Sienna stood away from the table, but she couldn't help but hear these simple and warm conversations, which carried no gossip. The girl was pleased to hear that no one was being bullied in these conversations, which is probably why she felt so at ease. However, the maid also understood that this did not mean that the guests would be as kind to the mistakes that the maids might make. In a moment, she brought dessert to the ladies' table. The girl quickly told what kind of dessert it was and what it was made of, and the ladies were amazed, because such a sweet treat was served to princesses and queens. The lady couldn't wait to taste the cake, so one of them dared to be the first to cut off a piece. In a moment, the girl was beaming. The dessert was so delicious. The guests were pleasantly surprised by the dessert and didn't even know what to do next, so they kept calling the maid to help. Sienna behaved calmly because she could understand the ladies' reaction, since it was their first time trying chocolate, but she was interested in the older lady. Looking back at her, she wondered if she liked the dessert. The woman felt ashamed because there were cake crumbs on her face, so she looked away in shame and tried to quickly wipe the crumbs away. The girl, without a second thought, offered the woman a napkin. The older lady was pleasantly surprised. The maid wanted to help the lady dry herself, but she refused. The other ladies at the table also smeared themselves, but were surprised that the maid did not look at them with disgust, but rather the opposite. So they asked for a napkin for themselves. They themselves were a little embarrassed that they had behaved so carelessly during dessert, and thought that the maid was embarrassed to serve peasants like them. But Sienna objected. The girl assured them that they were all dear guests in her eyes, and she only wanted the ladies to enjoy their tea. The girls at the table almost burst into tears at these words. After that, the girl offered the lady tea and said that if they wanted anything else, they should not hesitate to ask. The guests immediately began to ask for tea. The first girl immediately tasted the tea and found it quite aromatic, probably because it was served in the imperial palace. The second girl didn't notice any difference from the tea she drank at home. The other replied that she had heard that to really know the real taste of tea, you had to taste it. But looking at the table where the Baroness was now sitting, she said that only one of them could understand that. The lady at the table asked the maid if it was really the Baroness. Sienna apologised for not introducing all the guests before, but was surprised that the girl did not know what the Baroness looked like. The girl replied that the Baron had only recently married a lady, so the Baroness had not yet visited the apple orchards. There were rumours that the Baron's new wife was truly beautiful, and the rumours were true. Looking at Baroness Appleton, Sienna noticed that she knew etiquette well, so she mentally hoped that Jeanne would do the job. otherwise the tea party would be ruined. Meanwhile, the Baroness's maid was only doing what she could, mentally praising herself and being glad that everyone would continue to watch her work. The girl had the most important guest of all, and she was the daughter of a diamond magnate, so she was right where she should be. In a moment, Jeanne served the Baroness dessert and placed it next to the lady, but Appleton looked at the sweet coldly. After that, the Baroness menacingly asked how much longer she would have to put up with the maid's arrogant behaviour, not to mention the fact that dessert was served to her as if she had been done a favour. Jeanne instantly came to her senses and realised that she had made a mistake, but remembering her etiquette teacher, she was always praised. The girl's hands began to shake. From this, the Baroness concluded that servants in the imperial palace were completely useless, and thought that a good punishment for a maid would be whippings all night long. The maid didn't know what to say to that, and bowed her head even more. Sienna came to her rescue and began to apologise to the Baroness. However, the Baroness did not understand why she should continue to tolerate such behaviour. The former princess replied that this tea party was arranged by the imperial family. She assured that if the guests were dissatisfied, it would be an insult to the owners of the palace. The girl's words seemed like a threat to the Baroness, but Sienna assured her that this was not so. After this, the Baroness gave up and gave Sienna another chance, but warned that if she failed to surprise her, the maid would be punished, just as Jeanne should have been punished. The maid agreed, but at that very moment she remembered her childhood, when at such a tea party, the aristocrats would praise the tea brewed by the princess with a malicious smile. At such a terrible moment in life, there was no room for error. But the girl wondered why she remembered it now. The maid quickly came to her senses, because the most important thing now was to do everything correctly. Having brewed tea, the girl informed the Baroness about him. Having offered it to the lady, the girl waited for an answer, but the Baroness gave her a somewhat sly look in response. Sienna waited for an answer. The girl knew that the taste of black tea was affected by its quantity. Without scales, it was difficult to determine the dosage and how many leaves to put in the teapot. In this case, you had to pour a teaspoon of tea, but without a slide. You also had to pour the leaves slowly so that they didn't clump together. With the water at the right temperature, it was necessary to start pouring the tea on time. When pouring tea, the teapot had to be held high so that the stream of tea mixed with the air, which gave the tea a rich flavour. As delicately and carefully as possible, the girl poured the tea and did not spill a drop. She looked into the cup and realised that the temperature and amount of tea were perfect, but everything else was a matter of taste. The maid understood that if the Baroness did not like the taste of such tea, there would be problems. But she could not do anything about it. So after the lady tasted the tea, the girl waited for an answer. However, after a moment, the Baroness smiled and replied that the tea was unsurpassed. Sienna was very happy when she realised that everything had worked out for her, after which she told the Baroness that if she needed anything else, she should call, and the lady said that the maid would serve her. The tension that had prevailed before had disappeared, and the tea party passed without any unnecessary problems. The younger maids solemnly bid farewell to the guests. The ladies who were initially served by Sienna called out to her, and the girl rushed to them, apologising for leaving them. But the girls were not offended. On the contrary, they were grateful to her for it, for who knows what might have happened if the Baroness had been angry. The maid thanked her for her kind words, and with that, they said goodbye. The girl looked around again and noticed an older lady standing sullenly behind everyone. She rushed over to the woman and asked if she liked everything. The woman replied that after today, she would have something to think about, because as the maid could see, the woman was not at all suited to such society. The older lady expected to hear many insults upon arriving here, but thanks to Sienna, she still dared to get out of the carriage and attend the tea party. Concluding her speech, the woman replied that thanks to the maid, she was able to enjoy fragrant tea and sweet chocolate, as well as conversation with her friends, so she would never forget today. According to ancient rules, a maid had no right to show personal friendliness in front of guests. But Sienna was so happy to hear these words that she decided to forget about these rules for a moment. While the former princess was saying goodbye to the older lady, the Baroness was quietly watching them. The maid's actions seemed unusual to her. After tea, the maids still had work to do, despite the fact that the girls had been working since dawn and serving guests under the scorching sun. The maids expected that the imperial palace would have better working conditions, but there was still a lot of work to be done on the estate. While the other maids were falling from their feet from exhaustion, Sienna was finishing her dessert. Juju also joined in, happy that she could finish eating while the guests were there. The maid asked her friend why she hadn't eaten anything, to which her friend replied that if she ate sweets, she would lose muscle mass. At this, the former princess assumed that her friend had a hard time at the tea party. The ladies who served Juju still wouldn't let her pass because they were amazed at how strong she was, and even suggested that she quit her job as a maid and go work in the garden. While the former princess was talking to her friend, 2 more maids approached them, who had previously taken care of the girl, but now they had come to thank her. They praised their colleague for serving the Baroness so well, so they asked her to teach them how to conduct a tea ceremony just as well. While the girls were arguing among themselves about who should be first in line for training, Xana snapped at them. Everyone turned to her. The girl was still negative about the foreigner who had her kingdom taken away from her. The maid didn't even pay attention to the fact that Sienna had saved her today. However, even now that they were there, the friends were still negatively disposed towards the merchant's daughter's words, and they were not ashamed to remind her that the tea party could have failed because of her. The last straw for the maid was that she was even told to learn to control herself and behave with dignity. At this, Xana became angry and turned around and left the kitchen. After the girl left, the other maids almost immediately forgot about her and began discussing the Baroness, because she stood out so much from everyone else. Sienna couldn't help but agree. She also noticed that not only did her posture emphasize the lady, but the Baroness's manners were also at the highest level, so she assumed that she was not just a Baroness. Late at night, Baroness Appleton walked into the Imperial Palace and approached the prince's chambers, but Saul wanted to stop her. The knight told her that if she continued to come to the prince late at night, they might be misunderstood. The Baroness gave an innocent look, although she was not at all afraid of this, and also wondered how she could forget about the prince in such a case. To this, Saul replied that the prince only seemed normal on the outside, but in reality, he only thought about soft squirrel paws. After that, he fell silent, realizing that he had said it out loud. The Baroness told the knight to continue talking about it, but the warrior did not say another word, and at that the lady walked past him to the chambers. When the lady entered, she immediately began to call out to the animals, and they immediately rushed to her, sitting down. This made it clear who this princess really was. After that, the assistant said that he would take a bath, and the Baroness had nothing against it. While she was changing clothes, the knight was nearby the whole time, and saw how the lady put away the blue ruby. The prince bought this magic stone, priced like an average estate, to be able to change his body for 12 hours. When His Majesty had fully returned to his usual self, the aide asked how the tea party had gone and whether Sienna had disappointed the prince. Rashid replied that he was already confident in her, but she even did more and managed to exceed expectations. As the maid served him, he noticed that the girl had small, modest eyes and looked away as the dishes were served. Incredibly, she embodied the height of etiquette. He also noticed that the girl's grace could not be hidden even under the maid's clothes. Finally, the prince said that the tea party had been quite enjoyable. Sol could not believe that the prince had completely ignored the fact that Sienna had many reasons to hate His Majesty. Rashid's logic was also not all right, because even at the ball in honour of his birthday, the prince was not interested in anything at all. It was also impossible to get any thoughtfulness or friendliness from him, for he was firmly convinced that anything that was not nice had to die. At this, the knight thought that the prince's sole goal was to bring Siana to his palace. Sol couldn't believe his guesses, and the fact that anyone would have the idea of taking a princess from an enemy kingdom as a maid. But given the prince's character, he could pull it off. At this, the knight tried to bring Rashid to his senses and reminded him that the prince personally killed the girl's family and seized her kingdom, so it's not a fact that she wouldn't want revenge. However, the prince quickly silenced his friend and said, "What if there was no—" But the girl passed the test. Meanwhile, the girl was wandering around the kitchen looking for flaws in the fabric, and when she found one, she quickly began sewing up the hole. Rif came into the kitchen and announced that a guest had come to visit them. The girl was surprised, and the senior maid said that the Baroness had come to see her. Following the senior maid, the girl still couldn't shake her excitement because she was sure that the tea party had gone well, so she didn't understand why the Baroness had come. The senior maid knocked on the door and stepped back, waiting for the Baroness to give permission to come in. Siana waited patiently too, as she could not guess the reason for the visit. The lady stood up and apologised to the maid for disturbing her and asked if she had surprised the girl too much with her visit. The girl was very surprised when she saw that in fact, the Baroness who had attended the tea party was not in front of her, but an older and modest lady. The Baroness bowed her head slightly in greeting and introduced herself as Magdalene Appleton. The woman replied that she had been incredibly impressed by the maid's abilities at the tea party. The woman stepped back a little and pointed to the table where the basket of apples was. The Baroness replied that it was a small thing, but she would like to thank the girl with this gift and talk to her for a few minutes. The girl could not believe that she was standing before the real Baroness Appleton. The woman confirmed it again and invited the maid to sit down. Siana stood there for a while, trying to figure out who that noble lady was, but she realised that she had never mentioned her name. When the maid came to her senses, she immediately began to apologise to the Baroness and explain that she did not know who she really was, so she apologised if she had made any mistakes. The Baroness listened to the girl and looked at her in surprise, then smiled and told the maid not to worry about it because she herself had come to the tea party undercover. The woman said that this had all been planned from the beginning, and Siana looked at the Baroness in surprise. When the Baroness received an invitation to tea from the imperial family, she really thought about whether she should go, because such an opportunity did not come often. But she was worried about her own appearance. Because of this, she didn't like going out in public, because she already knew what gossip would be spread about her as soon as they found out who she was, because the Baron's wife couldn't look that bad. The woman could not allow anyone to speak ill of her. While she was thinking about this, a man came to her chambers, but did not go inside, but only passed a letter through the crack. After reading it, she wondered what someone else would do if they received something similar. But in the end, she decided that this was her chance, and that if no one really knew who she was, they wouldn't touch her. When the Baroness first saw the girl, she realised that she knew everything, and even despite the maid's old clothes, the woman noticed an incredible grace in the girl. The maid made quite an impression on the Baroness, and then she wondered what it would be like to be as graceful as this girl. After that day, the Baroness immediately sat down to her books on etiquette. The woman practiced it with all her might, because she could not forget the day of the tea party, which gave her unprecedented joy. That is why the Baroness would like to thank the girl properly and greet her, as befits an aristocratic lady. Magdalena slightly lifted the hem of her dress and placed her hand on her chest. Siana was shocked that the Baroness had greeted the maid with a bow. It was wrong. The girl noticed that the woman was holding one of her hands incorrectly, and that she couldn't do a good handstand either. But when she looked at the Baroness, she felt warmth. It was a simple greeting, but it said more. The girl understood how much the Baroness was a beloved wife. Moreover, she knew how to give people happiness. Because of this, The girl understood that she was not the one who had the right to condemn the Baroness, because she had shown respect for a simple maid. Therefore, the girl wanted to thank the Baroness in return. Accepting the apples, she sincerely thanked her for the gift, which she would never forget. After that, Siana immediately went to the kitchen and did not miss the opportunity to treat the other maids with apples. The girls sat at the table and savoured every piece of fruit. The girl looked at her colleagues and understood their admiration, because before that, the most they had received was stale bread. So after these apples for the maids, the Baroness became like a goddess. Finally, the girl decided to try an apple for herself and noted that they were indeed very tasty. However, she could not forget that noble lady. Recalling her image, she noticed that she had the same violet eyes and silver hair as the Crown Prince. The girl immediately assumed that it could be his sister, but she didn't understand why the princess needed to come to tea in that case. Reef came into the kitchen to taste the apples too, after which she broke the news that from today on, Siana would become the head maid. After the senior maid announced this news, Jana immediately flared up in anger. The girl did not believe these words and demanded an explanation. The senior maid exhaled heavily, but still explained that the tea party a couple of days ago was actually a test of the junior maid's abilities. She wasn't going to explain anything more because it was already clear who was the best of all. After that, Reef said that starting tomorrow, Siana should be in the Emerald Palace. Finally, she said that the girl would serve Princess Aris and then left the kitchen. The maid was left standing nervously looking at the door. She didn't have the strength to return to her colleagues because she understood that each of them wanted to be in her place, so she was sure that now everyone would hate her. The girl had already prepared herself for such an attitude, but suddenly all her colleagues applauded her and congratulated her on her new position. Siana was shocked that what she was so worried about hadn't happened, and she began to get angry with herself for thinking badly of her colleagues. The other maids couldn't help but admit that they were a little jealous, but they understood that if the girl hadn't intervened at the tea party, they could all have been punished. Finally, she smiled and thanked her colleagues for their kind words and made it clear to herself that she had completely forgotten that there were completely different people here, not like the ones in her palace. Siana promised that she would buy the girls something sweet with her first paycheck. Jana, in turn, did not want to calm down and only got angry at her former friends. The girl couldn't understand how, with her rival's background, she could be hired as a head maid. Moreover, now everyone else supported her. The merchant's daughter could not accept that she was not the first to become the head maid. Juju stood up for her best friend and said that Jana was talking nonsense. The girl was offended. Finally, she shouted that she would tell her father everything and left the kitchen. There was a moment of silence, but almost immediately the other maids forgot about her because it was quieter that way. After that, the girls chatted until late at night while tasting apples. Returning to her room, Siana quickly packed her things, although they were few, and lay down in bed, but sleep still did not come. The girl couldn't believe that she would become a senior maid so soon, because you could stay in the junior maidservants for a long time, even for a lifetime. But even so, it was better than being a princess. Juju entered. The best friend came a little closer and, searching for words, handed Siana a hairpin and finally said that she had brought a gift in honour of her promotion. The former princess silently stared at her friend's outstretched hand, which held a hairpin, and could not take her eyes off it. Juju said that the maids could dress up a little. Putting a hairpin on her, her friend said that the girl should not dare to think that she was worse than anyone else. The former princess looked at her friend and thought that the younger maids received very little money, and Juju bought a hairpin for her. Tears of happiness came to her eyes. The girl's heart was pinched by her friend's actions and, unable to bear it, she threw herself into her colleague's arms and sincerely thanked her for everything. The best friend was surprised at first, but then smiled warmly and replied that they were still friends. It was very warm next to her best friend Siana. Jeju told the girl to stop crying and assured her that everything would be fine. The candlestick in the room burned out. The next morning, Reef was calmly drinking tea in the kitchen, where the senior maids were, and asked one of them if Princess Aris had ever had a servant. The maid standing at the door confirmed that the princess had a maid, and it was her, but the girl asked to be transferred back because it was impossible to stay in that palace. The maid understood that all this sounded illogical, but assured her that it was better to constantly wash the floors here than to continue living in that palace. The girl continued to share her memories and said that there was no maid who could stand the princess. At least in their empire, that was for sure. The next morning, having gathered herself and put on her friend's gift, the girl firmly told herself in the mirror that she was ready. She had been the princess of a defeated kingdom before, and now she was a maid of the empire. So from now on, only the best awaited her. However, in the carriage, she was immediately warned that the job would be difficult. Aris's former maid told me that no one wanted to stay in this position for long, so if she had had the opportunity, she would have left long ago. At this, Siana said that it must have been difficult to cope alone, and the second maid almost shed a tear, confirming her colleague's words. But the most difficult thing was to contact the princess. The girl wondered if the princess was really that harmful. Her colleague leaned over a little and said that not only that, but that Princess Aris was a real monster of the empire. Once the emperor fell in love with a dancer named Rosemary. He gave her a small palace, which was later called Rubinov. The daughter of that dancer now lived there, the seventh princess. When the girls arrived at the scene, Siana couldn't believe how run down the palace itself was, but the second maid didn't expect anything else. The girl went inside and started calling out to at least someone, but no one came out to meet her, and the maid just stared at the walls, covered in cobwebs. Walking down the corridor following the former maid, the girl still couldn't shake off thoughts about the rumours about the princess, and wondered if it was really true. The maid thought that the girl was treated this way because her mother was of low birth. When they knocked on the princess's chambers, she let them in, but she deliberately threw a spider at them, and one of the maids was very scared and fainted. But Shan was not impressed. After inspecting the palace, the maid was sure that the princess would not be able to grow up healthy in such an environment. When the princess asked why the second maid wasn't scared, the girl looked at her incomprehensibly and said that she didn't understand what had happened and would now do what was expected. Princess Aris didn't understand what the maid wanted to do, and in a moment, Siana grabbed her head and screamed loudly, as if in terror. The princess looked at the maid in shock, but said nothing. So the girl immediately introduced herself as her new servant. The girl looked at the new maid and couldn't believe that she was smiling so sweetly, but she wasn't afraid at all. At this, the girl turned around and returned to her chambers, loudly closing the door and telling the maid to leave, because she did not like maids. A few minutes later, the second maid regained consciousness and, calling out to Siana, immediately rushed to her and, taking her hands, thanked her for finally saving her. However, the girl wanted to ask about her duties, but the former maid replied that she only needed to take care of the princess and everything else was at her discretion, and that was it. When she realised that she was now alone, she wanted to scream in despair, because there were no other servants here, and the princess hated her. However, she quickly pulled herself together, because even if it wasn't there, she had to do her job. The girl decided to clean up the place first, so she got down to business without delay. It took a long time, but when she looked around, she was satisfied with the cleanliness. While she was catching her breath, the princess came up behind her and said that the maid was doing something stupid. Siana quickly turned around and approached the girl, wondering what she could do to help her. However, Aris was only angered by the maid's behaviour, because she acted as if she were a real princess. At this, the girl shouted loudly for the maid to stop pretending. The girl continued to scream that she had the strength, that the new maid would run away from here at the first opportunity. The girl silently looked at the princess until she calmed down. During their last conversation, Sol asked why the prince had decided to send Sienna to the Ruby Palace. Rashid replied that he had originally thought of bringing the maid to his palace. Hearing this, the knight immediately changed the subject and did not let the prince finish, immediately saying that he would provide all the instructions for transferring the maid to the Ruby Palace. Left alone, the prince remembered how Sienna smiled very sweetly when talking to the Baroness, and this smile sank into his soul. In any case, they would soon meet again. Meanwhile, the maid responded to the princess's statement, but pretended to be very surprised, because the fact that she wanted to escape from here was a secret. The next words completely threw the princess off balance, because the maid had said that she was paid a salary for her work, so there was no point in her refusing this job. The maid bowed slightly and made it clear to the princess that she would be with her until the very end to serve her. The girl did not believe the maid's words and decided to check her out. She overturned the bucket and asked if the maid would stay even after this, but Sienna did not give in to that either. The next morning, the princess woke up with the thought that the maid was strange after all. A moment later, the maid came with breakfast for the princess. The maid brought milk and vegetables, but the princess refused to eat them and ordered her to bring sweets, to which the maid replied that eating sweets all the time was not healthy. The girl did not understand what the maid was talking about, and, showing her hands, said that she had no problems with her height. Sienna noticed that the girl was very thin, but when the princess said that she was already 10 years old, this news completely threw the maid off balance. Even if the girl did not behave, she had to be provided with minimal care. While the maid was in a stupor, the girl showed her hands again and said that the maid was lying. When she came to her senses, the maid assured her that if you eat poorly, you can grow up sickly. After that, Sienna said that if the princess first ate what she needed, then she would bring sweets. Aris gave up and thought again that the maid was strange. The next day, the maid came early in the morning and, opening the window in the princess's chambers, began to wake her up. However, the princess did not react to this and only replied that she wanted to sleep more, so she sent the maid away. When the princess looked at her breakfast, she was very indignant, to which the maid replied that this was all that was left, because she herself had already had breakfast with a sandwich with butter and baked chicken. The girl was shocked that the maid had actually eaten it all, to which the maid replied that she was only following the rules of the imperial palace. Aris didn't understand what the rules were, so the maid explained that servants were supposed to finish their meals after their masters, and since the princess refused to eat, Sienna happily finished it all. The former princess knew how to get a picky child to eat. She just had to show him that if he didn't eat it, someone else would get it. It worked. The princess emptied her plate, but left the vegetables, and the maid pretended that she would be very happy to finish them, but Aris pulled the bowl towards her again and announced that she was not finished yet. After that, the princess quickly finished everything and was pleased with herself, because if the servants had to finish eating after the masters, Sienna would remain hungry. Instead, the maid was only happy for the princess and praised her by patting her on the head, but thought she had crossed the line and apologised for her action. The princess was overcome by this movement and said that since she had already eaten, the maid could be free and not bother her anymore. The maid immediately left, and the girl put her hand on her head. Since healthy eating was over, it was now time for hygiene, so the maid filled the bathtub and informed the princess. However, the princess immediately started shouting that she would never get into the water because she didn't like it and the brush hurt. The maid said that if the princess did not take a bath, then bugs would come and eat her hair and skin, and the little girl was really scared. Aris said that the maid was lying because she had never heard of such bugs, but the girl asked if the princess sometimes felt an itchy head, and assured her that it was precisely these bugs. The girl was very frightened and told the maid to wash her immediately. Once in the water, the princess felt uncomfortable, because before that she only took a bath when she was called to the palace. A moment later, the maid took out a washcloth, and the girl was already preparing herself for the fact that this very brush would prick her. But after Sienna began rubbing with the washcloth, the princess felt nothing. After that, the princess began to take a bath with great pleasure and realized that everything around her did not bring anything bad. After taking a bath, the girl returned to her rooms, barely able to stand on her feet, and told the maid that she was very tired because she had exhausted her for the day. The maid thanked the princess for her patience and said that it was time for bed and that she wanted to tell the princess a fairy tale for the last time. The princess was only angry at this, saying that the maid had been doing nothing but tormenting her since morning, and now she was interfering with her sleep. At this, the girl said that she would go to sleep whenever she wanted. Sienna expressed concern and, apologizing for this, hurried to leave the chambers. But the princess stopped her and told the maid to tell the tale anyway. Once upon a time, there lived a diamond princess. And as you know from her name, she really liked these stones. Collecting diamonds from all over the kingdom, the princess adorned herself with them, which made her shine incredibly brightly. However, one day she learnt that a dragon owned the most valuable gemstone. The princess really wanted this stone for herself, so after walking a thorny and swampy path, she found herself near the tower where the dragon lived. The dragon looked at the princess and said that she was very beautiful, so if the girl agreed to marry him, the diamond would be hers. The maid did not have time to finish telling the tale, because the princess yawned loudly and said that she had never heard such a tale before and fell asleep. Sienna kissed Aris and wished her sweet dreams. As she left the room, the girl looked at the princess and gave her word that she would help her grow up healthy, because that was the maid's job. The next morning, the princess climbed a tree and hung there, thinking about how everything had changed when a new maid arrived in her palace. She went to the garden where the maid was working and almost stepped on the spot where she had just planted the flowers, but Sienna stopped her in time. The girl asked what exactly the maid had planted, and the maid replied that she had planted several kinds of flowers. The soil was fertile and soft, so the flowers would soon grow. The maid said that once they grew up, they would be able to weave a beautiful wreath. The princess started to get angry again, because she didn't understand why Sienna really treated her like a princess. As she walked past her palace, the girl kept wondering what the maid's real plan was, and kept thinking about how to bring her to justice. Suddenly, the girl Aris noticed the hairpin and asked the maid if she had lost anything. The maid looked around and noticed Shuju's gift, which was now on the princess. The girl could not believe that she had been so careless as to lose such a thing, so she approached the princess and said that this hairpin was very dear to her. The maid asked her to return it, but the princess did not care about her words and only said that if the garden was hers, then the hairpin was now too. Sienna was shocked, but again asked her to return it. Aris didn't understand why the maid reacted that way and even felt a little scared. The girl turned around and ran away, saying that if the maid wanted to bring her back, she should have caught up with her first. The girl was sure that the maid would never catch up with her, but she didn't expect that to be untrue, because she noticed that the maid was incredibly fast and was already almost there. The princess ran to the small pond of her palace and looked around, but at that very moment, the maid had already run up to her. Sienna said that playing with other people's things was very bad, so she asked for the knife back again. The girl was speechless for a moment. The princess again saw how the maid spoke to her as if she really considered her her lady and did not intend to run away from here. Outraged by all this, the girl threw the hairpin into the water. One day, a maid arrived at her palace and promised the little princess that from now on she would always take care of her. Aris huddled close to the maid, feeling warmth as if from a mother, and asked her to really take care of her. However, it turned out that the maid had her own intentions here, as she constantly stole things from the Ruby Palace and sold them, so she was soon caught for it. The girl was about to be executed for treason against the imperial family, and the maid begged the princess for help. The girl tried to stop the guards, but no one heard her orders. The next maid also did not stay long, and very soon began to pack her things. The princess noticed this and asked where the maid was going. The maid replied that she thought that since she would serve the princess, she would be able to get some benefit from it. But the girl turned out to be useless. After that, Aris could only watch as the maids left her one by one. She didn't even have a mother, so she couldn't consider herself a princess. The girl knew how they treated the mudbloods, but she didn't expect it to be so bad. Everyone considered her a very harmful princess, which is why the girl didn't even have her own maid. But most of all, the princess feared that Sienna would soon leave her, like all the others, saying that she was tired of serving the girl. This dream made the girl jump out of bed, but when she looked around, she realized it was just a dream. However, she couldn't help but accept the truth that everyone was abandoning her. The princess was sure that the current maid had already left the palace and had been packing all night to do this. So that it wouldn't be so painful, the girl mentally prepared herself for it in advance. However, in a moment, Sienna loudly opened the door to the princess's chambers, and the girl turned away so as not to show her tears. The maid approached and thought that the princess had not slept. The maid suggested that the girl sleep a little longer, but the princess paid no attention to her words and only thought that she had not been abandoned, despite her actions yesterday. She threw herself into the maid's arms. The princess began to apologize and say that she had not meant to throw the hairpin into the lake, and asked for forgiveness for this, and also that the maid not leave her. Sienna assured her that she had no intention of leaving her, but the princess did not believe her. Exhaling, the girl said that the princess's concession yesterday had saddened her, but children were sometimes picky. The princess said she understood why the maid didn't like the Ruby Palace. She was the only servant there, and there was a lot of work. Aris assured that from today on, she would help with everything she could, because she wasn't as harmful as people thought, so she just asked not to leave her. The maid understood that they were a servant and an imperial child, but even though the girl was a bit naughty and cried a lot, the maid did not want to leave her for any reason. The maid once again made it clear that she was only the princess's maid, because she had previously given herself a promise to help the girl grow up healthy. From that day on, the princess constantly tried to help the maid, as she had promised. The girl noticed that Aris had stopped throwing such antics, like with the hairpin. However, Sienna noticed that cleaning and washing were difficult for the princess, so she said that from now on, the girl would study. But the princess flatly refused. The maid assured her that the girl could not study anything complicated, but only learn to write for a start. The girl opened the chest, but neither a piece of paper nor a pencil was there. At this point, they turned to the servant, but he told them that the paper and pencils were high-quality materials, so he could not give them away so easily. The maid assured that this was necessary for the princess to be able to teach her, but the man replied that the maids constantly disguised themselves as the princess to steal valuable things from the palace. The man replied that if the maid needed anything for the princess, she should ask another member of the imperial family. After these words, Sienna was disappointed. Besides, the maid was not comfortable asking someone for something like that. The princess suggested asking Rashid, and the maid was surprised that he and the princess were talking. The girl confirmed and said that he was friends with her mother. At this, the maid thought and thought that the prince might agree to help them. Assuming this, the maid finally agreed to at least try to ask the prince for help. So she decided to write him a letter. However, They did not have time to send the letter, as the prince was already in the Ruby Palace, and even the maid did not expect that Rashid would arrive so quickly. The princess was not very happy to see the crown prince in her palace, and asked why he had come if they had only asked for written permission. The prince replied that as soon as he read in the letter that his sister needed help, he could not ignore it, so he came personally. At this, he asked to treat him to tea, which the girl got angry at. Siana apologized and replied that there was no tea in the kitchen, but the prince was not offended and said that he had brought everything with him for tea in advance. Having brewed tea, the maid rolled the tray away from the guests. The girl knew that their palace was not far from the prince's palace, so she suspected that sooner or later they would meet again. However, the girl did not expect that everything would happen under such conditions. In addition, the maid constantly felt the prince's attentive gaze on her. Nevertheless, the girl simply silently poured the tea, and the prince immediately tasted it, then smiled, and Siana assumed that he really liked it. After the princess and crown prince praised the maid's tea, Siana immediately realized that the prince had not forgotten her. Rashid asked if the maid had told her story, and the princess replied that she had nothing better to do than ask about her brother. The maid was worried that these words might offend the prince, but he just sighed and said that it was he who appointed Siana as a maid, and that he was the one who sent her to the Ruby Palace. Aris jumped. The girl wanted to know why her brother did this, but when he replied that it was because the maid was nice, the princess instantly calmed down and agreed with the prince. Finally, Sol was forced to interrupt the tea party and reminded the prince that he needed to get back, as they had to go to the Imperial Assembly, although Rashid refused to stay here any longer. The aide insisted that it was time for them to go, and the prince, surrendering, handed over the document. The princess took it and asked how much she owed her brother for it, but the prince replied that he had already been paid in tea. The prince said that was enough for today, and they assumed that this would not be the last visit. Rashid approached the maid and thanked her for another wonderful tea party. Aris noticed this and got angry, telling her brother to stop clinging to her maid and getting out of there. When the prince left, Siana told the princess that she was impressed by the good relationship between her and the prince, but the princess replied that she would owe her brother later, because this document was in debt. The maid didn't understand what debt the princess was talking about, and she explained that she and her siblings would later compete for the throne, so she didn't understand how good a relationship could be between them. After these words, the maid understood everything. Until one of them takes the throne, they are not just brothers and sisters, but rivals. To this, the girl replied that she didn't care because she had neither family nor friends, so she didn't even really want the maid to turn to the prince for help. Siana was a little disappointed to hear this, because close people couldn't be a support for each other. She also realised that if the prince didn't care about Aris, then she wouldn't be living so badly. The girl also understood well that a princess only had power when she was already appointed heir. The former princess also had to grow up early. Looking at the princess now, the girl remembered her life in the kingdom and how she had to do everything she could to make life at least a little better. How much she wanted not to think about anything important. Looking at Aris, she realised that the only thing she could do for the princess now was to make her life easier, which was soon to become too difficult for a child. Saul was amazed to hear that the prince really liked Siana, and he confirmed it by saying that the girl had eyes like those of a cute squirrel. The prince kept thinking whether to take the maid with him or wait a little longer, but in a moment, he changed the conversation and asked if the assistant had noticed the changes in the palace, and he said that the palace was clean. Besides, the princess herself looked much healthier and cleaner, so I assumed that the maid was well versed in children. However, Rashid only kicked the knight for his inattention and said that Aris had revealed herself to the maid. The assistant understood that the prince had planned all this from the very beginning. The prince replied that he understood that the maid treated anyone well, and that it did not depend on the person's status, but that was not enough for him to fall in love with her. For a moment, he remembered how he had first met his sister when she was still in her mother's womb. Then the woman let the prince listen to the princess kicking her legs in her belly. At this, the prince continued and said that from that day on, he and Aris had a common understanding of what they both found cute. Meanwhile, at the Ruby Palace, the maid wondered how often the prince would visit them now, but the princess had no idea. It had been a long time since the girls last saw each other, so a chance meeting in front of the train station cheered them both up, and they threw themselves into each other's arms. Her best friend noticed that Siana seemed to have lost weight, but her friend said that it was more likely because her friend had become stronger, and Juju couldn't help but brag about how she had been working out in her free time. Suddenly, the friend noticed that the girl had put the hairpin back and asked about it. The maid said that one day the prince visited the princess's palace again. Under the pretext that his sister would probably want to thank the prince for his help, he came and brought with him a delicious cake, which he wanted to treat the girls to. The princess could not refuse. Noticing this, the prince told the maid to prepare tea, and the girl obeyed the order, but thought that no member of the imperial family would come to greet the maid. While tasting tea and cake, Aris noticed that 2 cups of tea for a document was too much, so she decided to ask her brother for something else and emphasized that the hairpin Siani fell into the lake. Rashid immediately agreed to find it, even without his sister's request. Having summoned many people for this purpose, the prince also ordered the lake to be drained, so the hairpin was quickly found. Juju was very surprised to hear this, but that wasn't all, so the maid continued her story. One night, late at night, the girl was pulling a heavy cart. She kept thinking that for just one document, the prince had generously rewarded her and the princess and given them many things. So now she was pulling them to the palace. Not expecting any help, the girl understood that the maid must be strong, so she continued to pull the cart. But suddenly it became lighter, and she looked back to thank him and saw the prince. Siana asked why the prince was here and why he was helping. The prince replied that he did it because he wanted to, and saw that the maid was having a hard time. Without saying anything else, the girl ran away. Having finished the story, the maid rushed to her friend, assuming that the prince was a little out of his mind, and Juju could not help but agree with this. The best friend also couldn't understand the prince's actions, so she was very worried about Siana, saying that if she were around, things would be calmer. But the girl knew that her friend had almost been promoted. The girl's conversation was interrupted by the princess, who began to shout that she was looking for the maid, because she was already very late. The girl already wanted to eat. She grabbed Siana's hand and led her to the palace. She looked back at Juju and thought, that was why she couldn't even think about bringing another maid. Returning to the palace, the princess pretended not to remember the name of her maid's friend and asked why the maid liked her so much, suggesting that it was because of her physique. The maid knew that the princess knew her friend's name, but replied that the princess was right. The girl said that while she could carry one bag, Juju could easily lift several. Looking carefully at her maid, the girl said that on such an occasion they should bring her a lot of food, because she also wanted to become tall and strong, like Siana's friend. The maid smiled and thought that the princess was very cute. But what wasn't cute was that the crown prince came to their palace again, and Aris wasn't happy either. The prince replied that he wanted to check the condition of the lake, but the princess was just beginning to get indignant when Rashid silenced her by showing her the new cake and tea. Siana also couldn't help but notice that the prince was being too kind to the princess's ordinary maid, but she couldn't refuse anything. As soon as they entered the palace, Sol became suspicious and looked around. The unknown pursuer quickly hid behind a building to avoid being noticed. After that, the stalker immediately went to report everything to her masters. The woman reported that the crown prince had come to the Ruby Palace again and had brought with him sweets that Aris liked. This greatly annoyed the 5th princess of the empire, Yvette, because she could not understand the actions of the crown prince. The girl's mother, the 5th Empress Venay, reassured her daughter and said that she should understand her younger sister because she was an unhappy child. The princess was not reassured by this and did not understand why her brother was always bothering with this girl. Finally, the girl thought that she should show her younger sister where her true place was. Upon receiving the letter from Iveta, Aris was outraged, but quickly realised that if she didn't come to the tea party she was invited to, it would be even worse. Siana asked how exactly her older sister had teased the princess, and she replied that they were constantly laughing at her mistakes. The maid reassured the girl and said that now she had her. The maid assured the princess that she need not worry now, because she would teach the girl everything. She went to the bookshelf and took out one. Watching the maid's actions and words, the princess suspiciously asked who her maid really was. The girl replied that she had once been a junior servant in a captured kingdom. Previously, Siana had not insisted on studying because the princess did not really want it. But it was impossible to delay it any longer, because to survive in the imperial palace, it was necessary to know minimal etiquette. At this, the maid began to tell the princess that she could not start drinking tea until the owner of the tea party allowed it, after which she showed her how to drink tea properly. The princess was not very pleased, because the simple tea ceremony was actually not that easy, but she still diligently did what the maid said. As soon as the cup touched the bowl again, the maid praised the princess and said that everything was better that way. Aris was delighted, and without getting up, thanked the maid in return.